It is now my pleasure to introduce, the President and Chief Executive Officer of the Conrad Hilton Foundation. Steve Hilton spent a few years in the business world and as an entrepreneur before he found his own calling, and that was when he joined the foundation in 1983 and decided to carry on the philanthropic legacy of his grandfather and his father, Baron Hilton. He has also followed their examples in how to apply a business approach to the art of giving. Steve joined the foundation in 1983, served in virtually every position in the foundation until 1998 when he was named president. And in 2005, he assumed the position of Chief Executive Officer. Please welcome Steve Hilton.
Well, good evening, everybody. And it's nice, actually, you know, when somebody stands up and there's a lot of talking and they're saying hello, hello, and there's talking. And that's a good sign. And I think that's partly, I must say, just in case some of you don't know, this is our second year with the Hilton Humanitarian Prize at the Global Philanthropy Forum. And getting back to the talking part, I think Jane Wales is one of those incredible people who bring such a vibrant energy and intellect to this whole enterprise. So we're very proud to be connected with you and GPF. So please forgive me. I have some notes, and I will go through these and introduce the very, very special people that you'll hear from shortly. Not only does Handicap International help hundreds of thousands of people living with disabilities every year, the organization has succeeded in influencing the way the world deals with this acutely vulnerable population through its advocacy work. My grandfather, Conrad Hilton, created the Hilton Foundation nearly 70 years ago to help the most disadvantaged and vulnerable people throughout the world, a description that perfectly describes this year's Hilton Prize recipient. The Conrad Hilton Humanitarian Prize was started in 1996 when one of our board members thought it would be a fitting tribute to my grandfather's lifetime humanitarian efforts. The prize is meant to recognize an organization that is making extraordinary contributions toward alleviating human suffering anywhere in the world. The goal of the prize was threefold: to advance the work of the recipient with a large, unrestricted cash prize, which is now $1.5 million, to call attention to the need for more worldwide humanitarian aid, and to increase the visibility of the prize recipient's fine work, and hopefully expand its support from other donors. The $1.5 million is unrestricted because these are the most often needed injections of funds and the least popular among those donors who want to see the impact of their investment. From a young age and up until his latter years, my grandfather never lost concern for the disadvantaged in life, including people living with disabilities and especially children. He directed his hotel managers to consider minorities and persons with disabilities equally with other job applicants long before many employers addressed these subjects or it became mandated by law. Even in his corporate headquarters, I remember there was 2 women that had severe physical disabilities, and nobody really said anything or noticed anything, and I think it was just an accepted part of the corporate culture. And part of my grandfather's commitment to assisting this vulnerable group stems from his lifelong admiration of Helen Keller, a young woman just 8 years older than him and the person who inspired a good deal of his determination in his life. His esteem for Keller found voice in a major Hilton Foundation program. Recently, I had a reporter ask me what I would consider one of the most unique initiatives the Hilton Foundation has ever done. And I mentioned this group, which is the Perkins School for the Blind. And they work with blind, deafblind children and those with multiple disabilities in the United States and in 60 countries. This worked, I'm going to skip over this. So here in the U.S., the Hilton Foundation also initiated, Stephen Rothstein, forgive me, he's the president of Perkins. Anyway, it's an incredible organization, truly it is. And in the United States, the Hilton Foundation initiated a 10-year collaborative effort to enable early Head Start programs nationwide to serve infants and toddlers with disabilities and their families. So with that history, it really came as no surprise to anyone at the Foundation that Handicap International is the recipient of this year's Hilton Humanitarian Prize. Handicap International is, in a word, extraordinary. It has given hope to hopeless and voice to one of the world's most vulnerable and often overlooked groups of people. Its special efforts to focus on those with disabilities during a disaster or an emergency are especially commendable. Whenever I am preparing to present the Hilton Humanitarian Prize, it always amazes me to realize that nearly all of our laureate organizations and many of our foundation grantees have started with a vision from one or two people. With Handicap International, it was two visionary doctors and their wives. One of these couples is here with us tonight, Jean-Baptiste and Marie Richardier, and we salute you both. Now, please welcome to the stage Jean-Baptiste Richardier. Ma sincère félicitation. Bonne chance.
Thank you. Dear Michelle Bachelet, dear Steve, and members of the Conrad Hilton Foundation and jurors of the Humanitarian Prize, dear Jane Wells, and participant to the Global Philanthropy Forum, dear colleagues and friends from the humanitarian community. Last time I was in San Francisco was 40 years ago. And I really believed I would come back here much sooner. To a place that, for me at the time, symbolized so well for the French youth of my generation, every characteristics of the American dream. With my two teenage closest friends, Frederic and Yvon, at the wheel of our exhausted third-hand Chevy, we were stunned by the gorgeous landscape from the Golden Gate Bridge. But my emotion today is of a different nature, as I am here to share our true euphoria last month in Geneva when Judy Miller, Vice President of the Conrad Hilton Humanitarian Prize, made public the choice of the jury. She and Princess Salima Aga Khan, as well as Bernard Kouchner and Cornelius Samaruga, delivered moving speeches that deepened our joy, our pride, as well as our sincere gratitude, which I would like to reiterate today, toward the Hilton Foundation and the members of the jury, of course, but also toward all those who have supported us, believed in us, through a record 8 nominations. First, Michel Barnier, French Minister for European Affairs at the time, who encouraged warmly our first attempt 15 years ago. Then Javier Pérez de Cuellar nominated us twice with his unique, kind-hearted simpleness. Sergio Vieira de Mello, tragically slain in Baghdad, whose memory is so present in the hearts of many of us. Bernard Kouchner, the French doctor, co-founder of Médecins Sans Frontières, then head of the UN Interim Administration in Kosovo. Barbara Hendricks, the American-born lyric soprano. As goodwill ambassador for the UNHCR, she was and still is an unyielding advocate of our struggle to ban landmines and cluster munitions. Martin Barber, then director of the UN Mine Action Service, who believed strongly in the capacity of NGOs to steer the international community toward a mine-free world. And of course, Ari Neyer of the Open Society Foundation. We owe him the enthusiastic nomination that brought us here today. I also wish to express a very special thanks to an unknown person, Mr. Song Hak, chairman of the Cambodian Disabled People's Organization, who once wrote to the foundation a vibrant support letter. A driven companion of our early days, he has always been, for his 40,000 plus compatriots maimed by mines and exploded ordnances, an inspiring example of personal reconstruction. You can see that getting to stand here in front of you today has been no easy endeavor, as this coveted prize seemed determined to elude us, but here we are. And I wish to say that winning today is even more gratifying, as the selection process has been increasingly demanding of the candidates, and for sure, one don't win the recognition of the jury without a wholehearted motivation. I would also like to stress that our humanitarian action have drawn considerable benefit from being evaluated 6 times as a finalist. Indeed, unlike the endless controls inflicted upon us. Hold on. I do it again. Indeed, unlike the endless controls inflicted upon us by an overly cautious donors community, who, by the way, should think twice if they want to avoid smothering the humanitarian sector, which must be allowed to breathe, will require a flexible approach in order to stay reactive and mobile, in order to remain willing and capable to take calculated risks, including sometimes the risk of getting it wrong, and in order to stay creative, adaptable, and innovative in the face of an ever-changing humanitarian challenges. So, unlike with the escalation in mandatory controls, competing for the prize meant to willingly submitting ourselves to the in-depth analysis carried out by the consultants from the foundation, who helped us identify organizational weaknesses and motivated our teams to correct them. I would like to stress now the importance of the prize as an endorsement of Handicap International renewed focus on humanitarian aid, a competence that we had, without realizing it, gradually neglected over time, to the point of being virtually absent from initial responses to humanitarian crises, to the point that our staff considered to be no longer within our mandate to intervene in emergency situations. Surely enough, allowing the situation to drift further would have meant turning our back on the raison d'être that had motivated the creation of the association. This is why without renouncing the precious skills acquired over the years in longer-term development, a major effort was engineered in 2002 and 2003 to restore our emergency capacity, now hosted in a dedicated operational division. The success of this dramatic shift is self-evident when looking at our ability to deploy significant projects in Haiti and Pakistan, and now in Ivory Coast and Liberia, due to the large influx of refugees. I have personally always believed in the imperious character of timely aid brought to individuals and families crushed by misfortunes, assailed by men's madness, and marginalized by the indifference or powerlessness of local authorities to ensure their protection and provide for their essential needs, therefore forcing them to deploying the most incredible survival strategies. Indeed, when the unthinkable happens, when faced with the untellable, when everything else is falling apart, there must be something left for the most vulnerable minorities to believe in. Humanitarian aid, worthy of the name, is an aid capable of effectively taking into account their specific needs when they are plunged with no warning into a spiral of insurmountable difficulty. This challenge defines Handicap International ambition and strategy: to be there at the very hub of each humanitarian response and to take part in the organization of relief for the majority, so as to be in a better position to reach, to make visible the most fragile minorities whose rights are so often overlooked, and among them, the people with disabilities who need specific solutions to better cope. This strategy actually stems from the rationale that led to Handicap International creation, following the fall of the Khmer Rouge regime, while one of the biggest relief operations of the 20th century was taking place along the border with Thailand. Handicap International is born of the refusal of the wisdom of the time, an unwritten but very real rule affecting notably people with disabilities during humanitarian crisis that we call the triple whammy law. Not only do they suffer the same consequences as the rest of the population, not only are they in a much weaker position to cope with an environment so degraded that it becomes hostile, consequently more at risk for injury or death, they will, in addition, too often be denied the very assistance they need because international actors think that the required complexity and quality of care would be impossible to provide in such difficult settings. In the end, at the very moment when people with disabilities and their families are torn between the impact of a crisis and their own particular vulnerability, just as they are most in need of attention, they are denied the provision of specific assistance, deferred until the crisis is over. Handicap International humanitarian actions are therefore underpinned by a determination to challenge this rhetoric for inaction, which can only be considered a denial of rights. Through experience, we learned key lessons fully applied to the most recent disaster. One, time matters in an emergency, both in terms of the ability to save lives and to lessen the severity of permanent and/or secondary disability. Two, the rapid mobilization of staff and the funds to make that possible are key. Three, being prepared for appropriate immediate intervention is of crucial importance. Four, so is the transitioning to a longer-term development perspective while still engaged in emergency assistance. Overall, the alleged complexity is no excuse to defer assistance, and there can be little doubt that the added recognition from the Hilton Prize will provide our advocacy with a crucial support for reminding authorities and donors of their obligation to protect and assist the most vulnerable at a time and within the space of a crisis. Humanitarian actors are often asked what motivates them to start a project all over the world. Our simple answer is all the remarkable stories of the people we have been lucky enough to meet along the way and whose destinies have been so completely changed, those to whom crossing the path of Handicap International gave a chance. To represent them today, let me introduce to you a young and beautiful woman. Mom lost her leg as the result of a serious bullet injury when she was less than 10 years old. Her childhood came to an abrupt end while trying to seek refuge at the camp of Kawidang during the fighting between factions along the Thai-Cambodian border. When we met her, she was sitting on her hospital bed, weeping silently, endlessly. It is Marie, my wife, who took care of her and made her first prosthesis. She was the very first child to be cared for by Handicap International. Married to Olivier, also present tonight, and mother of 2 lively children, she is here in the name of the hundreds of thousands who need and deserve our help in their struggle to overcome their fate. I wouldn't find correct to stand on this stage without saluting the other co-founders of Handicap International. It actually started all like a family affair, with a handful of close friends surrounding my brother-in-law, Dr. Claude Simoneau, his wife, my sister, Marie-Ève, my wife, Marie, and myself, not forgetting my father, who served briefly but proudly as our first president. Obviously, things have changed a lot over the years, and to be honest, none of us had any of the skills the organization is so rich in today. But their role in shaping what Handicap International has become commands that they be associated to this celebration. I wish to salute as well our teams and partners in the 60 countries where HI has projects going on, with a special thanks to Alima and Alphonse, who represent them all tonight. Alphonse came all along from Kenya, where he leads our project to assist forgotten and quite desperate Somali refugees in the northern camp of Dadaab, individuals and families hit by HIV/AIDS in the western Kitale province, and people with disabilities surviving in the slums around Nairobi. All projects which were studied in support of this successful nomination. Alphonse and his team must be praised for that result. Alima came yesterday from Haiti, where she now leads our largest ever emergency operation. Following the earthquake that devastated the country, she jumped in a plane, and within 48 hours, she was leading our first emergency teams in Port-au-Prince to care for the many people wounded during the disaster, and soon afterward, in close coordination with all the other stakeholders, notably Healing Hands and CBM, she was organizing our contribution to the rehabilitation effort to fit several thousand amputees with emergency temporary prostheses designed by Handicap International. I also wish to salute the board members and teams of the 8 Handicap International national associations that now form the Handicap International Federation, a truly international organization established in 2009 in order to enhance our impact in the world's most underprivileged countries. The board of the Federation is represented here by its treasurer, John Lancaster, a Vietnam War veteran, a long-time advocate of the independent living movement, and recently appointed member of the board of the United States Institute for Peace. The Handicap International Network is now present in France, Belgium, in Germany, England, Luxembourg, and Switzerland, and of course in Canada and the United States. With the presence among us of Thérèse Dupuis, the dedicated president of Handicap International Canada, as well as Wendy Batson, the founding director of Handicap International USA. I first met Wendy in Laos 28 years ago when we started a joint program with AFSC to assist hundreds of villagers mutilated by unexploded cluster munitions with nothing like prosthetic services around. As Wendy will retire in June, I would like to take this opportunity to commend her lifetime commitment to serve destitute victims of war, first with the FSC, then with VVAF, and finally with us for the last 5 years, establishing solidly Handicap International in the US in an amazingly short time. And it is the opportunity as well to introduce to you her replacement, Elizabeth McNair, whose humanitarian experience led her in Haiti with the Community Housing Foundation, following several years with CRS, if I am correct. In nearly 30 years of indignation and humanitarian commitment, our contribution has been to demonstrate that a specific accompaniment of disabled people in the time scale and the space of an emergency is actually possible, and therefore constitutes an absolute imperious obligation for all. And I confess my excitement and pride to be presenting Handicap International achievement to the audience of the Global Philanthropy Forum. We know from first-hand experience the importance of philanthropy to furthering solidarity, equity, and fraternity, and improving humankind. So I am more than pleased to be in a position to thank you all on behalf of the community of humanitarian actors on the field for your collective and individual endeavor, and wish you all a happy 10th anniversary. Having Michelle Bachelet as keynote speaker at this year's ceremony in her new competence as Executive Director of UN Women is a true privilege for us. And I do hope that you will have noticed the major role played by women at Handicap International. To exemplify that characteristic and to conclude on a moment of collective recognition, I invite the people I named and are present to stand up to share the congratulations of the audience. Mom and Marie, please stand up. Alima and Alphonse, the field people. Therese, Wendy, and Elizabeth. John, I invite you to wave with your hands so that we acknowledge together that the American dream of my youth has somehow come true. Thank you very much. Wishing you a fruitful forum.
Stay here for a minute. I do.
Well, I have to admit there was a little confusion. I don't know if you picked up on that when I left, and Jean-Baptiste was very patient. And the reason, excusez-moi, monsieur, but I had a $1.5 million check I was supposed to give to Jean-Baptiste, and he was very patiently waiting for that. So at this point, I would like to present this to you.
Okay. That was even better.
We have a short video I'd like to show you, so please.
Looking back, I believe one of the finest accomplishments of my presidency was signing the Americans with Disabilities Act. The ADA was the world's first comprehensive declaration of equality for people with disabilities. It's why I'm pleased to recognize Handicap International for the assistance it provides to people with disabilities around the world. Handicap International's mission has transformed the way the world deals with this often overlooked group of individuals. It's why it is so deserving of the Conrad Hilton Humanitarian Prize. 13 years ago, I was asked to honor Doctors Without Borders when it was awarded the Hilton Humanitarian Prize. Today, I'm pleased to recognize Handicap International as it joins the family of Hilton Prize laureates, a group of 15 outstanding organizations alleviating human suffering through their extraordinary work. While we've made progress as a global society, much remains to be done. As I said at the signing of the Americans with Disabilities Act, now more than ever, let the shameful walls of exclusion finally come tumbling down.
Cambodia, 1982. The aftermath of decades of war and the brutal regime of the Khmer Rouge, who forced thousands of Cambodians into hard labor camps and killed over 2 million more, dumping them in mass graves. 2 young French doctors struggled to treat and rehabilitate severely wounded refugees. Handicap International begins.
I
saw children there, hundreds of them mutilated by the war. Some of them had lost an arm, others a leg, all because of a stray bullet or a landmine that a football had rolled over.
30 years later, Handicap International is still hard at work. But its focus has expanded from treating the needs of war victims to providing crucial assistance to all people disabled by natural disasters, injury, disease, poverty, or armed conflicts.
When you're a person with disabilities, your family doesn't treat you well. They believe people with disabilities are victims of voodoo, an evil spell, or the curse of an ancestor who did something wrong before they died.
The global population of people with disabilities is estimated at more than 650 million, over 80% of whom live in the developing world. Nursing these individuals, who are often unable to support themselves, causes hardship for families and strains public health care systems. Those with disabilities may be hidden away, and many suffer from lack of care or abuse. Handicap International's Federation of Core members employs nearly 3,700 staffers in 60 countries, all working to accomplish one mission: aiding vulnerable people in disabling situations, whatever the origin of their circumstance. To accomplish this, Handicap International focuses on 6 main service areas. Rehabilitation services provide access to orthopedic fittings and equipment, such as wheelchairs. Trained staffers build and fit prosthetic limbs in field workshops, a process requiring many visits, especially for the young who are still growing. Mobile units treat those who cannot travel. To address psychological needs, individuals meet in support groups or live in group settings while they're going through treatment. As a major first responder in emergencies, Handicap International provides rapid response to large-scale disasters by distributing aid, caring for the injured, rebuilding infrastructures, retraining individuals, and repatriating ethnic groups. Individuals with disabilities are very often overlooked in disasters. Handicap International pioneered the Disability and Vulnerability Focal Point, an all-inclusive emergency mobile medical and service center where other relief agencies can refer people with special needs. Handicap International also focuses on preventing diseases which disable and halting the spread of diseases which thrive in poor sanitary conditions. When cholera began ravaging thousands in Haiti, mobile teams already on the ground responded by treating the infected and providing health and hygiene education. Poverty can be disabling as well, as for this child whose mother was severely malnourished.
When parents leave for the field in the morning, they lock their child in their hut until evening. The child doesn't eat anything the whole day. Handicap International wants to stop this.
In 2006, Handicap International launched the Africa Campaign on Disability and HIV and AIDS, teaching about the disease in remote villages, reaching those with disabilities for the first time via puppet theater and dance performances. Such individuals are especially vulnerable to the disease due to sexual abuse. Local belief in some areas is that sex with a person with disabilities is a cure for AIDS. Handicap International is perhaps most well known for its anti-mines actions. While teams of experts continue to clear thousands of unexploded munitions hidden in the countryside, equally important is educating the citizens, especially children, about the dangers of mines.
Children move around the risky areas a lot in search of cashew nuts and mangoes. It is highly dangerous because they do not know which areas are safe.
Advocating for an international ban on the use of landmines has been a driving force for decades. In 1997, years of effort by Handicap International and other founding organizations were rewarded when the international campaign to ban landmines won the Nobel Peace Prize. As part of its goal to strengthen the civil policies that affect the everyday lives of people with disabilities, Handicap International was also a leading advocate of the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, which became international law in 2008.
That's the magic of a new type of diplomacy, between a country and a few friendly countries focused on a specific objective.
Promoting the inclusion of people with disabilities in society at large is another Handicap International service area. And much of that effort remains in the field, at the community level, where events such as this showcase the talents of those with disabilities.
We have to show others how we treat the disabled, and they deserve to receive the services same like others.
Whether on the ground in Banda Aceh or clearing mines in Kosovo, Handicap International works toward a day when all people with disabilities will be recognized and valued, educated to their fullest potential and treated equally with dignity and respect. Until that day, the work continues.
Tonight, we are so honored to have an incredible world leader and humanitarian as our speaker, Michelle Bachelet. Ms. Bachelet's accomplishments are many. In 2006, she was elected the first woman president of Chile, an historic achievement. And she further made history by saving billions in revenue and then redirecting these funds to social protection programs, many for women and children, daycare centers, low-cost housing, medical care for the elderly. These are just a few of her initiatives. In addition, she reformed the social security system in Chile. Are you available for? No, I'm teasing. I'm not finished yet. This woman has done so many incredible things, and I would be remiss in not sharing some of these things. I was talking about for the United States, we need somebody like you. So, President Bachelet also led Chile to become the first country in South America to earn membership in the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. Prior to being elected president, Ms. Bachelet was the first woman to serve as Chile's Minister of National Defense. In fact, she is one of the few women in any country to ever serve as a defense minister. It is obvious she is both very smart and very tough-minded. Since Chile's constitution does not allow a president to serve 2 consecutive terms, Ms. Bachelet left office a year ago. With an 84% approval rating, that speaks to her outstanding leadership qualities and the affection with which she is held by her fellow countrymen and women. Having served 4 years in such a high-pressure leadership post, Ms. Bachelet could have been expected to take a well-deserved sabbatical. She did not. Instead, she took on a new challenge. As Undersecretary General of the United Nations and Executive Director of its newly established UN Women, here she has a great platform to wield international influence to improve the lives of women and girls around the world. I'd like to share just a little of Ms. Bachelet's personal history. Born in Santiago, she moved from base to base in her early years with her father, who was an Air Force general, and her mother, an archaeologist. Along the way, she lived 2 years in the United States, where she learned to speak English fluently, one of her 5 languages. She started her political career at an early age, elected president of her high school class. In 1970, she entered medical school at the University of Chile, but her journey was not the road less traveled. After General Pinochet came to power, her father was imprisoned and later died in prison as a result of torture. She and her mother were also imprisoned and tortured. Following her father's death, she and her mother were allowed exile, first to Australia and then to Germany, where she studied medicine. When she was able to return home in 1979, she became a pediatrician and established a thriving practice. While practicing medicine, she fought for the reestablishment of democracy in Chile. Her interest in civil-military relations led her to study military strategy. Not surprising, then, that she began her political career in the Defense Ministry. Today, Ms. Bachelet expands her quest to make the world a better, safer, and more equal place as the head of UN Women. Señoras y señores, bienvenida, señora Michelle Bachelet.
Thank you. Thank you, Stephen, and thanks to the Hilton Foundation for inviting me here this evening. And I have to tell you, I'm especially pleased to be able to congratulate the recipient of this year's Conrad and Hilton Humanitarian Prize, Handicap International. Really, congratulations. The assistance that this organization provides to those acutely affected by conflict and disaster, disease and poverty offers inspiration as well as guidance to all of us seeking to empower those who are most vulnerable. And it is heartening to see the response to people with disabilities is beginning to change in many countries in terms of their everyday life as well as in crisis situation. And I saw this in Haiti last year after the earthquake, where many people who had limbs crushed and amputated were still able to get around. Handicap International teams made a point of going to the poorest neighborhoods to distribute walking aids and other forms of care. And as I think Jean-Baptiste mentioned, and Alphonse told him, I was a little bit more than a week ago in Dadaab refugee camp in Kenya, and I could see the work, the wonderful work they are doing there. So really, it's an honor for me to be here tonight with all of you. As you saw in the video in 2008, the UN Convention of the Rights of a Person with Disability came into force, and it marks a paradigm shift in that it views persons with disability not only as objects of relief, but as subjects with rights, capable of claiming those rights and making decisions for their lives as active members of society. Intended as a human rights instrument with a social development dimension, it thus commands the attention of all UN agencies, including UN Women. The need to reach people who otherwise might be overlooked, not only in humanitarian operations, but also in development programming, is also high on the UN agenda, including, of course, UN Women, as we seek to accelerate progress on gender equality and women's rights. And I want to share with you this evening my thinking about the creation of UN Women and how we can meet the high expectations to see meaningful change in the lives of women and girls. In creating UN Women, which consolidates 4 smaller and underfunded agencies, UN member states recognized that if advancing gender equality is to accelerate progress on all development goals, then something needs to be done to speed up the slow pace of change. In creating UN Women, they signal that gender equality and women's rights are on a par with other global imperatives, such as ending poverty and hunger and combating climate change. And we know that UN Women cannot do this alone. We will need to build strong partnerships with all parts of the United Nations systems, as well as with governments, civil society, private sector, foundations, and the media, to ensure that we can bring about a turning point for gender equality and women's rights in all countries. And as you all know, the challenge we face are considerable. The huge gaps in wealth and income that have accompanied global growth have deepened with the economic crisis, driving down wages, cutting job prospects, and pushing millions more people into poverty and insecurity. Political conflict and natural disasters are again threatening food security in many parts of the world, straining household coping strategies. This does not have to be the case. Policymakers can be persuaded that things can be managed better so that we can keep our countries safe and our economies prospering by advancing women's economic and political empowerment and guaranteeing their safety. And this priority should be at the top of all our lists, not just UN Women's. I always say we are all UN Women. As I said on my arrival at the UN late last year, and this is very ridiculous, but I will quote myself. The words that we hear after many high-level events, that gender equality and women's empowerment are goals in their own right and central to all other goals, must be more than a mantra. It must become a lived reality in all countries. End of my own quote. Well, we're starting to see some hope. Women's economic empowerment has already caught the interest of several key players, including corporations and the media, as well as government officials. The World Economic Forum's Gender Gap Report shows that across 134 countries, greater gender equality correlates positively with a GNP per capita. A study of Fortune 500 companies found that those with 3 or more women board members outperform others by 53%. If somebody didn't realize, what I'm trying to sell here is that by giving women more space and more power, more opportunity, is a win-win response. The World Bank and others have shown that in all countries where women have access to good education, good job, land, and other assets, there is stronger growth, lower maternal mortality, greater food security, and less risk of HIV and AIDS. This is the kind of thing that makes government pay attention. And let me be clear, economic empowerment is not just about harnessing women to economic growth. We know that women who earn their own income can also challenge the way household decisions are made and demand the right to be free from violence. But too many women remain economically marginalized. In some regions, 60 to 80% of women workers are in vulnerable jobs with no benefits, low pay, and often no pay at all. Empowering women economically is therefore a key priority for UN Women. I really believe that there won't be any women's right. They won't be really effective if women don't have economic autonomy. So that's why we are putting so much effort in this. And also because we know that when women have salary, have their own incomes, they are always ensuring food security, buying textbooks for their children, helping their own family and their own community. And one is, for us, is a key priority, and one in which we will pull the UN system together. We must combine our talents and resources to make this a reality. We must work together to support women's economic autonomy, including opportunities for good jobs and asset building, and the extension of social protection to all workers, including migrant workers. It is not acceptable that millions of people, including more than 600 million women, are living on less than $1.25 a day, and millions more make too little money to lift themselves and their families above national poverty line. And when we're talking about economic empowerment, we're thinking on a very broad range of things, from women as workers, migrant or non-migrant workers, so they can have minimal, I would say, dignified jobs, from women who can be entrepreneurs, from micro, small, or medium entrepreneurs, so they can have access to credit, so they can have access to technology transfer, so they can have access to communication technology, so they can have access, in the case of urban women, to all of this, but in the case of rural women, rural livelihoods, we need to ensure them water supply, storage supply, so they can really not only produce good products as they do, but they can storage it and have also better conditions to go to the markets, to negotiate better prices. We need to give them technical transfer. We need to give them managerial skills, and we need to help them get access to markets. Thank you very much. It's water. But also, when we're talking about economic empowerment of women, we're also thinking on how we can improve gender parity at boards and also at senior positions. So, because we believe really that women can make a great contribution. But if we were saying that it's so important that women can have a very important participation in the economy, we also believe it's important that women's voices are heard. And that's why another priority is how we enhance the voice of the women, their leadership, their participation. So one of the areas is how we involve women in politics. And when I'm talking about political participation, I'm talking a wide range of issues, not only on political parties. I'm talking about women at grassroots organizations, women at local governments, women in parliaments, but also women in trade unions, and of course, women who can be candidates for all kinds of position. And I believe it's a basic prerequisite for women's empowerment, as well as for a genuine democracy. When we think that in many countries, women are at least the half of the society, to the voice of the women, if they are heard, if they are really well represented, it will be a much more solid democracy. It facilitates women's direct engagement in public decision-making and helps to strengthen government transparency and accountability. And while progress in this area has been glacial, today there are 19 women head of state of government, if we think on the 192 member states of the United Nations. That means a little bit less than 10%. And if you think on women's representation in elected legislature, the Beijing's goal was that in order to put interesting legislature that will increase and improve women's condition, you need at least 30%, a critical mass of 30% female parliamentarians. This goal is only was able to achieve it in 28 countries in the world, half of them in the developing world. 30% is widely viewed as the critical mass needed to bring about positive change. So it is possible that in this area too we will soon reach a turning point. And women are eager to take on this role. As we see in the Arab states region, women who once stayed out of the public arena are now standing alongside men to demand the right to participate in revitalizing their societies, including running for office and participating in constitutional reform processes. And I met with some of them during my recent visit to Cairo, and their determination and courage should be an inspiration to all of us to demand better. And I have to tell you that yesterday a wonderful thing happened in Tunisia, because they voted and decided that in the Constituent Assembly that will be elected to produce the new constitution, they decided that the principle will be parity. They will have 50% members female and 50% male. And that, I think, that's a really historical step. But another urgent challenge, and one where we are finally seeing some momentum for change, is ending violence against women and girls, which is endemic in all countries. And countries are starting not only to understand that this is the most pervasive human rights violation, but it also implies costs for the countries. In the US, for example, costs run an estimated of $500.8 billion a year in extra health and mental health care and lost productivity. In Canada, with a much smaller population and lower healthcare costs, the total is still $1.16 billion. And in Australia, just a recent survey showed it costs $13.6 billion a year. So this is a wake-up call to governments and corporations in all countries. We need to demand a standard set of questions on gender violence be part of all national service so that no country can say they didn't know the scope of the problem because they didn't have the data. Politicians then need to take action. They need to enforce the laws against domestic violence that now exist in over 130 countries. And UN Women will provide the basic packages of services for countries to respond, such as by setting up hotlines and shelters, providing care for survivors, and police protection for those at risk. The ravage of gender violence are especially horrible in conflict situations. The blurring of the lines between the battlefield and the home front in many of today's conflicts means that civilians are increasingly targeted and women are singled out for sexual violence and abuse. And we have all seen the headlines, the systematic rape and violence in conflict that spills over into families and communities when the gun falls silent. And UN Women makes clear that women are not only victims of violence, they are also agents of conflict resolution when they get the chance. And we found that in 24 peace processes over the past 2 decades, women form less than 8% of negotiating teams, with the result that women's concerns are almost entirely missing from peace agreements. Here, too, there is a momentum for change. Rape is now recognized and punished as a war crime or a crime against humanity, depending on the circumstances. And the Security Council now recognizes sexual violence in conflict not only as a humanitarian issue, but also as a security issue, one which they have the responsibility to prevent. But much more is needed from all of us. And UN Women could not have happened without the women's rights advocates, including many in governments, who worked for its formation for nearly 4 years. But as many of them have said, they could not have done it without the support of governments, foundations, and NGO allies. So in addition to saying that it's time to get serious about women's rights, it is time to stress the power of partnership. And in developing the first UN Women Action Plan, we therefore put partnership at the center, because working together we're not only more comprehensive, bringing knowledge and ideas from civil society, foundations, and the private sector to tackle challenges holistically, but we're also more powerful, working from all angles to create the kind of momentum that can really make a difference in the lives of women and girls. And to get the results we know are possible, UN Women needs to strengthen our own capacity and that of our partners in every country where we work. And we also need to strengthen the women's rights groups in all countries, because change comes about fastest when a whole range of forces are working from different angles, from bottom up as well as top down. So that's my call, is to work together in terms of being of all these people who I believe there's so diversity here in this room, but there's something in common. It's all people who care, who really care. And that's why we all, I'm convinced, can work together thinking what else we can do to ensure women and girls in the world a better world to live. I would say that we are also working with the private sector partners as an active development partner. UN Women is currently partnering with the UN Global Compact to promote the women's empowerment principles, a global corporate code of conduct for empowering women in the workplace, marketplace, and community. It calls on companies to ensure that women represent at least 30% of decision-making groups, guarantee equal pay, provide flexible work options, and adopt a zero-tolerance policy on sexual harassment. And to date, over 185 heads of companies from every region of the world have signed the CEO statement of support. The promotion of this principle is helping to foster collaboration with businesses, governments, and civil society in more and more countries. But we know there is much more that can be done. And I think together, all of us who care, we need to find a way to harness our energies, the knowledge and wealth created in countries like this one, and channel it to those who are still left out, so that we can make this a turning point for women, men, boys, and girls in all population groups and in every country. Because working in partnership, I know we will succeed. Thank you very much.
I hope that when you all leave tonight, you leave with inspiration from hearing about Handicap International's work. And I feel confident in saying, Ms. Bachelet, when you talk about partnership, that I'm sure you can count on every individual and organization represented in this room tonight to help you achieve the goals you have set to empower women and girls throughout the world. Thank you, everybody, for the attention. Enjoy the evening.